As of late, my thoughts have been a little cloudy. I've been feeling a little overwhelmed with what I have going on behind the YouTube scenes. If you're concerned about me, you shouldn't be. While I'm very appreciative of that, I'm fortunate to have a good support structure around me that helps quite a bit. I like being transparent with my audience, which is why I'm bringing it up. I'm kind of behind on some deadlines and it's causing me some stress. When this happens, I normally try to find a topic that's easy to make a video about, but I always have mixed feelings. I want to make epic, awe-inspiring videos, but I always seem to get in my own way. I end up speeding through a video and it feels like the video sucks and the meaning that I'm painting in that video sucks too. We're going to set that thought aside for a moment. I have a close childhood friend of mine who is having a birthday soon, and also his pet bearded dragon recently passed away. I thought I could kill two birds with one stone and give him a present that was also a memoriam for Thor, his beardy. I will admit, it does feel a little callous to attempt to be efficient while doing nice things for your friends, but here we are. Today I'm painting a Seraphon Old Blood. I've never painted a Lizardman before. I think they're a little silly. Even the name sounds forced. Lizardman. In reality, I'm just kind of scared of painting characters like this. Subjects like monsters, animals, etc. are more challenging to paint in my eyes. They don't have defined borders. What I mean by that is this vampire has very clear starting and stopping points for each design element on him. This piece of armor starts and stops here. This part is clearly skin, and this part is clearly not skin. When it comes to the Lizardmen, the borders are fuzzier. He has a harder exterior back that flows into a softer underbelly. Compound that with the fact that animals can sometimes have wild patterns even when there is no discernible change in their body, and now it's even harder to paint. This model and similar subjects are more of a canvas than a Space Marine is. You, as the painter, have to decide where colors are going to start and stop, all the while thinking about highlighting and shading, color schemes. It can feel like a real challenge, which makes it less fun, which is why I tend to avoid monstrous type creatures when it comes to painting minis. So let's challenge ourselves today and paint something outside of our comfort zone. I'm going to paint this Old Blood to match Thor, my friend's bearded dragon. That helps quite a bit with more natural subjects like a lizard, taking inspiration from the outside world. I began with a chocolate brown base coat. Thor had a lot of creams and ochre tones, and brown is a good starting point for both of those. Thor had a darker spine, so my next several highlights to his hard exterior focused on the outer edges of his scales. I was working with ochre colors and then a bright off-white yellow and a couple of mixes in between so I'd get a nice smooth blend between my colors. With those colors established, I started to work on the flesh of the Old Blood. I took a similar approach and highlighted up from that dark brown to a creamy off-white highlight. I chose the airbrush here for the sake of speed, but also the soft borders between colors that you naturally get from using an airbrush might better simulate how a lizard's skin flows from one color to the next. You can make your life a lot easier by painting the whole model one color progression, but I felt like differentiating the hard shell and the softer skin would help it feel more like Thor and in turn, more realistic. Lastly, I came in with Citadel's Wash Reichland Flesh Shade and sprayed it along the spine and also on the skin. I wanted to bring back some saturation and warmth on both the skin and scales and also deepen the shadow along the spine. With the main colors plotted out, I hit the whole model with a gloss varnish and proceeded to shade the model. I washed the flesh with that same Reichland Flesh Shade to get more definition in the fingers and the muscles. You can see how well the wash works with a glossy surface, but some manipulation with a clean, damp brush is still helpful to make sure it's all settling where you want it to. I then moved on to the recessed shading. I did several passes of colors getting lighter and lighter the further from the spine I got. One might ask why I'm not just washing the scales, because they are a great subject for using a wash. I wanted to make sure the colors I chose for the scales stuck around, and washing often can darken and desaturate the colors they're applied on top of. I experimented with GW's Snakebite Leather Contrast Paint and Army Painter's Darkwood Speed Paint for my recessed shading needs. On paper, they should work perfectly. They are richly pigmented, which means the coverage is pretty good, and they have higher flow than a normal acrylic paint, which means they should flow into the recesses very well. The gloss varnish helps even further with these recessed shades, allowing the paint to break surface tension even better. In general, both of these paints worked very well for recessed shading, but I probably wouldn't go out and buy them expressly for that purpose. Acrylic paint would do a similar job. If you want a more in-depth description of recessed shading, maybe in the recess. Check out my video on a subject linked in the description and also in the top right hand corner of this video. I made a couple mistakes and got some of the paint on top of the scales, and both products stained pretty quickly. I suppose this could be a testament to contrast paint and sweep paint even working on a glossy surface. I wasn't too concerned with the mistakes that I had made with my recessed shading because of my next step, but before we get there, let's hear a brief word from our sponsor. Broken Anvil Monthly is a Patreon in the business of creating wonderfully characteristic models in STL format for you to print, paint, and play with at home. This month, they're debuting their Fiends of the Undercity collection, which includes over 50 printable miniatures featuring adventurers and deadly creatures with a unique subterranean theme. The good guys of the set are some dark elves, deep gnomes, Molokin, and sentient forged constructs. And by good guys, I mean they're less bad than the next group of people that Broken Anvil is showing off. The baddies this month include a tribe of primitive troglodytes and the massive Komodo basilisks that they keep as guardians. Additionally, the troglodytes set features the elder god they worship. I would love to fight against a literal god with a tobacco pipe? Included in the set of 50 printable miniatures is also a set of suitably thematic underground terrain. I really enjoy how each month from Broken Anvil Monthly is a thematic set of miniatures and terrain that includes D&D 5th edition rules for some of the monsters, maps of the Undercity itself, and more. For $9, you can print and paint almost an entire campaign's worth of content. You can find all the links to Broken Anvil's Patreon campaign linked in the description. Thank you for sponsoring this episode, guys. Now, back to painting my Lizardman. With the shading complete, I varnished the model again with a matte coat. Painting on top of a matte surface with a brush in general is easier than a glossy one because the paint sticks down better. I then began to edge highlight all the scales in a similar way to my recessed shading. The further away from the spine I got, the brighter the color I used. This is why I wasn't too concerned with a bit of spillage with my recessed shading. I'm covering my sins with this step. I also mixed the same colors I used in the airbrush to get approximate highlights for the skin. I wasn't trying to fight what the airbrush did, but rather work with it. A great way to do that is with edge highlights like I did on the scales, but on something softer, like the volumes of his muscles, I basically applied highlights that were a little brighter than the final airbrush color. If you go too bright too fast, it can feel like you are ruining the subtle blends of an airbrush, so take it slow and steady and keep your highlights on the smaller side. The more surface area you cover up, the more you'll begin to feel like you're just repainting the parts you already airbrushed. For the black armor, I started with a wet blend of gray to black. Sometimes, especially on lighter surfaces, you need to do multiple passes of wet blends to get the opacity and smoothness you're looking for. I had to do 2 passes before it was good to go. That advice and more can be found in my video on wet blending, which is linked in the description and top right hand corner of this video, so if you're in need of more wet blending advice, check it out. Once that was nice and creamy, I topped off the black armor with a simple edge highlight. For the mouth, I began with a dark red and highlighted the webbing inside the mouth and the tongue with a magenta and a pink that I got from mixing white into the magenta that I was using. I then picked out the teeth with a similar ochre tone to his scales and a brighter off-white yellow. Now, let's paint some metallics. I always like to include multiple metallic colors on my miniatures. It helps break up the model. I painted the weapon details and the armor with a dark silver and the more ornamental pieces with gold. I washed the silver parts with black and the gold parts with a green wash. For the silver, highlighting was simple because all the parts were either tiny or very sharp and angular. What I do in this situation is apply a scratchy edge highlight with a very bright silver. On the gold parts that have more curvy surfaces, I reapply the majority of the gold paint where I want it to be strongest, clean my brush, and then feather it into the washed green gold in this case. In some areas, like the tip of the sword, I'll do that and I'll do an edge highlight for a little 1-2 highlighting punch. While I'm painting the dead flesh of these severed heads, let me do something that I haven't done in a very long time. Show some love for my patrons. These are all my Dark Wizard patrons who are incredibly patient with me regarding giving them some notoriety. Something I'm hoping to do better at. I appreciate any and all support that anyone gives me, but especially appreciate my patrons. Patreon is my most reliable and consistent source of income as a content creator. It doesn't ebb and flow much with how many views I'm getting. Some overlord in a cubicle somewhere doesn't slowly chip away at the percent that I'm due year after year, cough, Amazon cough. It's just there and it works, and I'm thankful for the people who are part of it. If you're curious what my rewards are on Patreon, you can check it out linked below. Now, onto the base. I began with a general wet blend of a dark muddy green into a very saturated electric green. I thought about doing the opposite of what I say in my videos. Often the base isn't a focal point, so you might paint it in a drab color so as not to draw attention away from the model you spent hours painting, and that makes total sense. In this case, the model's color scheme is quite naturalistic, so I figured I'd go crazy with the base just to try it out. When that was done, I hit it with a blue-green wash, and when it was dry, I dry brushed it with another lime green-like color. Admittedly, the photo-etched plants that I glued on earlier kind of got in the way of this, but I was able to reach the edges at least. I then started to superglue down all manner of tufts and sponges to simulate bushes and clumps of grass. I also used some leaf scatter from Green Stuff World and scattered it on the base. I adhered this with some watered down PVA glue that wasn't spreading around very well, so I also dropped down some isopropyl alcohol on my PVA glue, and that made them spread out very nicely. Lastly, we need some gore. I glued 2 short lengths of fishing wire to his sword, trying to keep in mind the direction of gravity. Then, with some Tamiya clear red and some acrylic black mixed together, I started to add some gore below the 2 severed heads and in between his fingers on his sword, like the blood streamed down the handle and got on his hands. For the fishing wire, I mixed Tamiya clear red and Mod Podge dimensional magic together and applied it to the wire. Mod Podge in this case has a thicker body to it, so it clings to the fishing wire better than just, say, Tamiya clear. I've never mixed these 2 products together and it didn't work perfectly. It got really thick and stringy and not in a good way. In the future, I'll just mix the Mod Podge with acrylic ink, which has worked for me in the past. Either way, the working time was long enough such that I was able to glob it on the fishing wire to make it look like streams of blood dripping off of the sword. The last bit of blood was some splatter flicked on with a toothbrush. Decapitation is quite a messy business, so he'd likely have some blood flecked on him, and this does a great job of doing it in a nice, subtle way. Lastly, I painted the base trim black, and it was done. Finally, let's come back to what I said at the beginning of the video and explain why the video is titled the way it is. This model took me around 6 hours to paint, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I could have easily spent 20 to 30 hours if I really wanted an impressive result. To me, that feels like phoning it in. When I look at this miniature, what I hear is, why is the contrast on the black armor so low? Why is the base taking attention away from the model? Why didn't you apply gloss varnish to the inside of the mouth? Why are both blood drips the same length? It looks kind of fake. The gold blends with the ochre of the lizard too much. You can't even see it. I'm absolutely positive that you have similar thoughts when you finish painting one of your own models. You see everything wrong with it. Do you know what others see? I painted a mini for you.
Oh my gosh. Dude! Oh my god. I mean, I'm always kind of blown away by your paint jobs, if I'm being honest.
You playing A Song of Ice and Fire with me really put the jet boosters on my hobby, which is really important to me because it's my job.
Yeah.
And I was really in a slump at one point, and that really brought me out of that slump. And I can't understate how important that is for me to be able to do what I do and enjoy what I do.
Yeah, and actually enjoy it.
Yeah, so
be enthusiastic.
This is a small thing that I hope I can repay you with.
Of course. Dude, I'm seriously so happy to hear that. Like, for real.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The majority of the world is made up of normal people that don't paint miniatures and don't know what is good or bad. When these people see your paint jobs, they love them. They're blown away by how small of detail you're able to render. You don't even need to paint well. The sheer size of the miniature is impressive. If you don't believe me, paint a miniature up as a gift for someone. Pick a subject that's meaningful and relevant to their lives and share your talent with them. It can be scary to open up in that way to someone else. Maybe they think you're being a cute little geek with your plastic toy soldiers, but in my experience, if you put love into humanity, you very often get it back in one way or another. Improvement is a double-edged sword when it comes to art. You're able to render better and better results, but you've now become aware of what is defined as bad in your medium. You might speed paint something and be aware of all the corners you cut, but a hobbyist who is earlier in their journey will look at that speed paint and be so impressed that you were able to paint something so quickly, so well. There's someone out there that is impressed by your paint jobs. Always. Someone new to the hobby, someone unfamiliar with the hobby. What you do is impressive to them, so take that and remind yourself the next time all you hear in your head is everything wrong with you. That's going to do it for this video, guys. If you like the channel and you want to support it, there are a number of ways you can do it, namely buying my miniature, the Duchess, and also the digital course that I made for the model to teach you how to paint it. You can buy hobby tools that I use and recommend with my affiliate links. You can buy merch that I'm making, all things linked in the description below. Additionally, if you guys are interested, I am running a Kickstarter campaign at the beginning of next year, and I'm sending out updates every Monday about the campaign's progress. If you want to read those updates, you can subscribe to a mailing list that I have linked in the description below. Also, if you're watching this video right after its release, I am live right now on Twitch, and if you want to hang out with me while I'm live streaming and painting some miniatures, follow the Twitch link in the description below. I'm live from 1 p.m. CST to 4 p.m. CST on Fridays. Subscribe or die! And most importantly, don't forget to paint more minis!